Alright, we're going to look at refining the arms a bit more. Now that we've got the back done, or the back refined a bit more. I guess we're never done. But the chest is looking pretty good, the back's looking pretty good. We need to work on the arms a bit more. The accuracy of the triceps and biceps right now obviously just needs a bit of work. So, as we take a look at the triceps, we want to continue to just look at accuracy of how those muscle masses really work and interact with each other. So we're going to look at making sure, of course, mirror is turned on, and we'll get a bigger brush. So we're just really looking to refine and adjust the overall shape and placement of these muscle masses. Now, as we do that, of course, we're still looking to add detail because we've refined the mesh a bit more. But for now, we've got to make sure that the overall shape of the muscle mass is correct. And then we can drop our brush size down a bit and continue to add a bit more detail. That looks pretty good. Now, with the triceps, there are actually 3 muscle masses in here. The central one, though, basically, I guess it's the medial head of the triceps. It is a bit smaller and less noticeable than the 2 side ones, which is, what do we got here? The lateral head and the long head. They're much bigger, bulkier masses. So the medial head is just not going to be nearly as noticeable. So what we're going to do, we're going to decrease our brush size now. And we're going to carve in around this just a little, decrease its size a bit here. So as we carve in around the edge, we're helping to define that muscle mass, but we still want to go back in with the smooth brush and adjust that a little bit so it's not quite so defined. But more often, we want to kind of go in and make some big adjustments that help us define shapes and regions that we can then go back and soften and smooth. So, as a general rule, you want to over sculpt to begin with and then soften those transitions. Alright, so we'll go back to our sculpt, and with a much smaller brush now, we're going to start adding some of that. Let's decrease our strength a bit more as well. A bit of the muscle striation detail. And then again with the smooth brush, decrease the strength a bit. And soften up some of that detail. Because with a skin layer on top of all of that, we're not going to have quite this much muscle striation visible, but we still want to have the illusion that that muscle striation is actually happening underneath the skin layer. So we put it in with pretty big detail and then soften those transitions. And what we're left with is a feeling of that striation actually being there. Alright, let's move around to the front and work a bit on this bicep. So the biceps basically has 2 parts. So if we go back to our sculpt brush, bigger brush, we do need to be careful though that we're not sculpting this so large that it becomes just completely unbelievable. And we're going to carve in around this just a little. Decrease its size a bit here. So again, we're adding in that kind of big, overemphasized muscle striation that we can go back and soften up. Now, I do always want to make sure that I'm trying to maintain the feeling of the overlap in those muscles. So carve in between. And then we're going to go back with a much larger brush and actually bring this front of the biceps out just a bit. Help round that out a little more. And now back to our smooth brush, a little bit bigger brush. Make sure the strength is nice and low, and we can soften some of that detail back in. So even though we're really sculpting kind of a fantasy character here, we want to make sure always that we're basing things on reality. So we're emphasizing reality, but we still want to have some semblance of reality within our model so that our character is going to be believable. Alright, and really looking around at the mesh from some other angles, the crease in the middle of the biceps there is just too much. So we're going to try the flatten brush here and see if we can bring that out. Now let's get a bit bigger brush. Alright, so flatten's not bringing that out for me as much as I want. So we're going to try wax. Wax is going to kind of fill that in way too strong. So now we can go back, carve that back in just a little bit. But the wax very quickly filled in that center mass for me. So now we go back, add a little bit more of that detail back in. Soften it back up. Now, up under the armpit here, we're going to get a bit bigger brush, and we're going to carve back into the armpit there a bit. So I'm always looking to try to see where those transitions are happening between the muscle masses and make sure that I'm keeping everything as defined as possible, so I really keep the feeling and sensation of the muscles overlapping each other. Okay, that works pretty well. Alright, we should actually define just a little bit more of that muscle striation in the deltoid before we move on. Remember, with this, always follow the direction the muscle is flowing, but you don't have to worry too much about trying to be perfect here because we're always going to go back and smooth this back in. So as long as we get the overall look and feel of that muscle that flows down across the arm and shoulder, when we go to smooth it back in, it's going to look really good. That's almost done. I'm going to make sure that we don't have any kind of major bumps on that muscle mass. Just again, because we do need to make sure it looks like there's actually a skin layer over it, and we're not looking at basically a cadaver muscle structure. Alright, so we leave ourselves with a bit of the feeling of that muscle striation there. But we've got rid of most of the really fine detail. We're just left with a sense of that underlying muscle structure. Alright, that looks pretty good.